you see them every day, Frank. I know, I talk about it quite a bit, and there's obviously those that exist. I'm not going to name any names, but they're out there, and
Can you name a couple of names? That's why we.
What's that?
And I'm like, Frank, how are we gonna buy this thing? Like we have nothing to base our numbers on. And
there's wires hanging out all over the place, power lines, everything. I'm like, but it's in a perfect location, right? And
why didn't you call me on that one?
What's the address of that property?
Coming to you from the mobile home park capital of New York City, Staten Island. It's the Mobile Home Park Exchange Podcast. And that's true because Staten Island has the only mobile home park in all of New York City. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo. Joining me is my partner, the very refined Eric Busuttil. How you doing today, Eric?
I'm doing great, Frank.
Great to be here. And thanks to Too Many Topics Media hosting us. We have a very, very, I think, interesting and different program today that we're going to be putting out. During the course of all our podcasts, what we've talked about, we started about how to find your deal or how to evaluate your deal, maybe the different ways of running it, whether you're running a park-owned home model, whether you're running a tenant-owned model. We've talked about some of the challenges that you might have in operating a community and speaking to different community owners about some of the challenges they face and, how they've overcome them, right? Those are all great topics. But today, because at the end of the day, at some point, what are you going to want to do with your park?
I think the topic that we're going to talk about today is how to prepare to exit a park, right? We haven't talked about that yet.
We have yet to talk about that. And we're very fortunate to have joined us, I think, Hunter LaRocca, Hunter and his teams are one of the preeminent players in the MHP space. Hunter LaRocca from Berkadia. We are very fortunate and we're glad to have you on board. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Apologies about the backdrop here. I don't have the fancy setup like you guys, so I'm going through the old school laptop, but appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, he's sitting in a very modern and chic office, and he's telling us that he doesn't have the fancy setup. I love it.
AI.
Well, thank you for joining us, Hunter LaRocca. And full disclosure, I've worked with Hunter and his team before. Super professional, really on top of their game, and that's why we wanted to have him join us today to talk about preparing your not only preparing your park for sale, but maybe some of the changes that we've seen in the market, because a lot of things have changed over the last, I'd say 24, 36 months. So Hunter, coming in here, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of it. Why don't you just share a little bit about your background, maybe how you got started in the space?
Yeah, I don't think anyone gets into the space on purpose, unless you're Frank Rizzo. But so yeah, I've been with Berkadia now a few months. Our team recently joined from Capstone.
That was good. That was good, by the way, Hunter. Very, very pointed on that one. I liked it. He looks like a mobile home park operator with that.
I wanted to get into real estate. Read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, like everybody else. Pretty cliche, but kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Didn't want to go work for the man and bring my lunchbox to work and get told when we can go take restroom break and when we can clock in and clock out. And so I've always loved real estate. Always wanted to get in on the investing side, and stumbled my way into a brokerage. Wanted to get in multifamily. All they had at the time was the manufactured housing team was looking for a role, and I said, hey, I'll try it out for a few months and then kind of squeeze my way into the multifamily side. And sure enough, kind of fell in love with it like everybody else. And honestly, I'm extremely grateful and happy for the way it turned out. Couldn't see myself in the multifamily space. It's this asset class is just so fun. Literally every day is different. Every owner is different. Every transaction is different. So it's just a great space to be in overall. And yeah, so I have a great team. There's 4 of us on our team. We have Kevin Inger, Ian Hipple, Brian Humble, and myself. Just recently joined from Berkadia, and so MH and RV parks across the U.S. So it's been a fun ride.
And I know you're being a little modest here, but just over the last, let's call it 12 months, what's the dollar volume that you've been involved with, either on the buy or the sale side?
This year's probably been slightly over $1 billion this year. did just north of $1 billion last year, and then obviously 2021 was just a different animal as a whole. So
just $1 billion. Just
those are some great numbers.
So with that, I mean, it gives you kind of a pretty good vantage point, things that work and things that don't work. But just there's been such a big change in the market over the last 12 months. I mean, we came from a very historically low interest rate environment, and we've seen maybe an unprecedented rise in rates, probably over the last 18 months. What has that done to the market or the marketplace? Like, what are some of the changes that you've seen?
I mean, it's a great question. And it obviously is not where it was in 2021. That being said, I don't think it's still a terrible market to be in. I mean, the macro environment as a whole the fundamentals are always going to be there. Affordable housing is always going to be in demand, probably now more than ever. So, I mean, that hasn't changed, right? The debt environment's changed. I think buyers are becoming a little bit more disciplined in that regards. Whereas, 2 years ago, seller could throw out any price they want and they're going to get it. And there's 5 buyers behind them ready to go. So I think the competition has dwindled a little bit. I think the debt environment has shifted some buyers and being a little bit more disciplined than they have been in the past, and kind of sitting and taking things slower. And just the buyer pool overall has shrank slightly, which again, I think minimizes competition and ultimately price at the end of the day. But I mean, deals are still getting done. That's the important thing. We're seeing a lot more creativity from both sides. The seller financing is starting to come back around a little bit. Like probably 10 years ago, that's all that there was. There wasn't much debt to be had in the space. And so we're starting to see some creativity there, and, even types of like partnerships and, providing equity and staying in the deal. There's all types of ways we're seeing deals get creative. And, I think it's ultimately helping, a lot of them get to the finish line.
Hunter, we started out, I'm sure in the business about going on 10 years now. We've been doing this for about 9.5 years. When we first entered the space, there was not as much of an abundance of your larger operators or your institutional buyer. And when we first started, I mean, we bought, one park, right? So we weren't really considered an institutional buyer at that point either. But as time went on, we've seen a lot of institutions, mid-size and larger institutions enter the space. And obviously when money's very cheap, like you said, buyers are, able to or sellers are able to get their price. Have you seen a difference in the buyer pool in the last year? I know that before we entered this higher interest rate environment, the price of these parks were starting to get outrageous. But again, you had those larger institutions coming in, and they're obviously able to buy at that bigger price. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you see in that aspect from where you sit?
I mean, to your point, exactly, right? We're seeing a big shift in the space. Not to say it wasn't sophisticated, but it's getting much more sophisticated on the capital and overall player size. The Apollos, Carlyles, Blackstones, a lot of the institutional groups are obviously in the space already. There's others out there who are not, who are still looking to get in the space. So I think it changes things from the perspective of cheaper capital, right? Ultimately will push pricing. I think it also it's starting to become sophisticated in the sense that the hold times are not going to be as long from a lot of those groups. A lot of these mom and pop owners have had these things since 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're generational assets they're going to give to their children, right? But as soon as an institutional group gets their hands on that, they have a predefined hold period. So I think we'll start seeing more activity and more transactions taking place over that course. And another thing it does, it really increases competition, again, pushing price. And one thing we've noticed from a lot of those groups is, I think initially their criteria on what they were buying and their strike box was very slim, had to be all tenant-owned homes, 200 plus sites in a core market. We're starting to see that shift quite a bit. A lot of those groups are kind of backstepping there, and we're seeing them take on more park-owned homes, not going into those same core markets they were at. Even size-wise, we sold a deal in Montana. It was 80 sites to Carlisle with private utilities, dirt road. So their overall buy box is widening. Again, I just think it ultimately creates more competition for the space as a whole. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of some of the key points from that.
You bring up an interesting point when you're talking about some of the newer players into the space, and some of these players have so much money they'll figure it out. But for us, we always felt the difference between one of the values that we brought it's you got to go beyond the spreadsheet, right? If you're not down on the ground, there's a different dynamic in one of these communities that you might have in whether it's multifamily housing or office or retail. There's a different dynamic to running a community because your customer has a different vesting in that community, right? You have to be on the ground and you have to understand that emotional attachment that your resident has to that community. And some of these, we found that some of these new entrants, that's the missing component, right? It's easy to look at this from behind the desk in a spreadsheet and say, oh, this is how I could create value. And then you get down on the ground and it might tell a different story. I mean, are you seeing any of these entrants over the last 36 months have a little bit of buyer's regret or looking at some of where they are now saying, hey, you know what, this isn't meeting my initial underwriting expectations and I've got to look for a different avenue if I want to continue, or maybe I want to, maybe I want to leave the space altogether?
You see them every day, Frank. I know, I talk about it quite a bit, and there's obviously those that exist. I'm not going to name any names, but they're out there. And,
Can you name a couple of names? So that's why
What's that?
Just a couple, right? Maybe later.
So the spreadsheet's not going to do the same work that, your team does. And, you guys get boots on the ground. You guys build a relationship with that seller. You're able to kind of get in and see the things that you're not going to see sitting behind a desk and in a spreadsheet, right? On the flip side, I think if you can create the synergies from both, we'll call it the spreadsheet corporate side, along with, the kind of mom and pop profile, getting boots on the ground, really getting there and kind of figuring out the core competencies of the park. I think if you can align those synergies, I think it's a win-win for everybody. A lot of times you'll have these mom and pop sellers, they've had them for 40 years. They don't even know what rent roll is, right? But they're sitting on essentially gold. So if they can get behind that and get their books and records in order, start, keeping up with the financials, the rent rolls, that will help them significantly in terms of selling and creating value, because a lot of these, institutional groups, they love the market, they love the park, but they don't have anything to base their numbers off of, right?
Sure.
So it's trying to kind of create an alignment on both sides of that.
And, when we talk about this, and I know, a lot of times people from the outside have an issue with, hey, there's new entrants in the space and it's kind of changing the space. But one of the values that we don't talk enough about is by having these new entrants in the space, it does create additional value for the resident down on the ground, right? Because in some cases, and not all, right, but some cases you have a multi-generational asset. By the time it goes down to the third generation, they're not as vested in the community, or they just look at it as, they don't look at it as from an operator standpoint. They look at it from, this has just been an income stream for me, and they're not reinvesting, and really they're creating a substandard product in the city or the county at large, right? Do you?
100%. I mean, out of the few deals we've sold, a lot of the owners still live in the park, right? But again, they're sitting on gold, and yeah, they might know some of the residents on a first name basis, but they're not reinvesting that capital into the park. Whereas these large groups will come in, they'll day one replace the fencing, they'll redo the roads, they'll bring in the homes, they actually enforce the rules there. So they may not know your name on the tenant's name on a first name basis, but they're ultimately still creating value and enhancing the community.
So I think just to go back to the importance of having the boots on the ground, and yes, I mean, when we first started in the business and the first handful of deals that we purchased, we had literally crumbled up napkins and a stack of papers that they pulled out of a drawer, and I'm like, Frank, how are we gonna buy this thing? Like we have nothing to base our numbers on. And a handful of times I was just like, I threw my hands in the air and I'm like, I can't believe we bought this property. And that's the difference, I think, from getting outside of, from behind the computer. I mean, Frank is dressed like he's, working on Wall Street, and we do live and operate in New York, but we're down on the ground, once, twice a month at one community or multiple communities. And I think that was the main reason we were able to get comfortable buying in this type of asset class without having those numbers and those books and records. Like, I mean, this is a very niche space that, you have to have a feeling for. And you get a sense from being there and, speaking to, either the family member of the granddad who started the property. I mean, you really can't get that from a distance if there's no books and records. So you have to get out there. And I mean, that's
you have to put boots on the ground. It's so important. So how have you been going about setting seller expectations in this market? Because I know, a couple of years ago, you saw secondary, tertiary markets, cap rates really compressing, deals pricing at a 5 or 6 cap. Interest rates have gone up on financing somewhere between 7.5% and 8.5%. Eric knows that better than anybody because he has, he's got a finance background. But how are you setting seller expectations, especially in the secondary and tertiary markets, about where pricing may come in this environment after they heard about everybody else getting a 4 or 5 cap?
I mean, you're exactly right. And I would say it's more or less realigning seller expectations. And the biggest hindrance that we had was 2021. I think every mobile home park owner in America had probably 10 to 15 offers sitting in their mailbox at prices that really didn't make sense in today's environment, right? And so they're probably looking back and saying they should have pulled the trigger on one of those. And it's hard to see a number 2 years ago that was twice as much as they may get today, and then essentially be happy and sell at that number. So it's just kind of realigning expectations. Again, what I said earlier, like just getting creative on on the financing side. If they're able to hold any type of paper for even a short while, I think that helps the deal significantly, at least in getting the price they want. At the end of the day, like we hammer on this all the time here. It's the market is going to set pricing, right? Our job as brokers is to make sure the market sees it, it's shown in the best light possible, and we're telling the entire story so that, we're ultimately creating competition on the buyer side, thus, maximizing price for the seller. So the market's going to set pricing. It's our job to push that out there, get all the information out there and make sure everyone sees it. It may not be the value or the price that they want, right? But at least they know, hey, this is where pricing's at. They're not leaving anything on the table. Whereas if they're just, taking one of the offers out of their mailbox, who knows how much upside they left on the table there. So it's just realigning expectations, telling them up front, you're probably not gonna get that number you had sitting in your inbox 2 years ago, but not to say it's a bad market still. Relatively speaking, I still think it's a healthy, strong market. It's just not the same where it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. So
my thought is and obviously we've seen a slight dip in interest rates recently, right? And for the last year and a half, we had a steady increase in interest rates, which obviously set the stage for how sellers feel about getting rid of their property, right? Where do you see this interest rate environment? Like, do you feel that we're getting to a point where we're going to start to see more properties hit the market and sellers become, like you said, the numbers are dictated by the market. Like, how do you see the sellers? Do you see them becoming more flexible in their prices in the near future?
It's hard to answer that question. I think we'd all be rich, but I do think that we've already started to see sellers be more flexible. I would say the last 6 months has probably been there's been sellers we've talked to in the past that they'll never sell this number they have set, right? 2 months later we get that phone call, hey, actually let's talk, let's revisit this. And so we're seeing that happen more and more often. We're seeing deals that maybe had fallen out of contract a year and a half ago now trade 15-20% lower than that. So I think we call this the buyer's market, right? But I think the flexibility, the creativity, the competition, at the end of the day, it's all going to be there. So I think it's going to come around, and we are seeing sellers get flexible. I think they're going to become more flexible. It just really takes some time to shift that realignment.
I think they've got to. I think as we go forward, and there's a mountain of debt that has to be refinanced over the next 24 months. I think that'll create some urgency in sellers' minds, where right now people were trying to kick the can down the road a little bit. And as they get closer, that might be the impetus to move forward. But with that, if you had to sell or you were thinking of selling, you wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to put my property on the market, what is something that somebody should do prior to, right, to get prepared? Or when should they be in contact with, yourself or or a broker to say, how do I get the best value on the exit? Like, what are the things that are going to help you present to the market to get that best price?
Yeah, and hopefully they're not doing it a month beforehand. Hopefully they're doing it over the course of ownership. But
Sure.
I mean, I would say to get ready and prepare to sell, I would say it's really two things. One, having your financials in check. If you don't have that, it's just going to create problems down the road. Buyers are going to be weary. It's going to shrink your buyer pool, and then also on the lender and debt side, it's just going to create challenges, right? So having your books and records in order is huge. I mean, that's probably number one. Number two is just it's the little things. It's making sure the property looks good, right? Like pressure washing the fence, signage, skirting, maybe just seal coating the road, mailboxes. Like it's the little things there that just show the appearance of the community. I think that first impression is huge. And just putting it in the best light possible. So I think that in turn with, just having your books and records in order, it's substantial, right? But it's not much time and effort on seller's part to do that. It's just the little things. Other than that, hopefully they've been creating the value over the course of ownership, right? Hopefully they're not leasing up half the community a month before they sell and causing a lot of red flags.
And just taking anybody with a heartbeat, right? Because that will get found out. But you're absolutely right. I think that's what you hit the nail on the head. Getting those little things done are so key because it's an impression. And I could tell you from the buy side, when we go into a community and we look at those little things, right? Whether the vacant homes, look like they've been the grass around it looks overgrown, whether the ditches are excessively, filled with debris, those little things indicate a level of care. And those, small fixers, right? You could lose huge value on the way out. And I'm sure that just makes your job that much more difficult.
Those are the
makes everyone's job easier. We just sold a deal, a few months back, and I pull up to the park and like the first three letters of the park's name is missing from the sign. There's like three homes that are just torn down, laying, the debris are everywhere. The utilities on a wastewater treatment plant, and there's wires hanging out all over the place. The power lines are hanging. I'm like, but it's in a perfect location, right? And
why didn't you call me on that one?
What's the address of that property?
We're all sitting here with a pen.
It's the little things, I could have gone out there and fixed all that up in like a couple hours, right? But that makes a huge first impression on the buyers. And what do they want to do? They want to come in and retrade day one just because of those things, right? So it's just making sure those are in good order before you get ready to market it.
Last question, right? Because I know this business is really the beautiful thing about it is all the people you meet and the stories that you just are able to grab. I'm sure you probably have. Do you have a story that stuck out? Maybe something that made you realize that this is the space you wanted to be in, or just getting to the closing table on a deal that stands out in your mind as like, wow, this would only happen in the MHP space.
Right, there's so many. We probably could write a book, and I'm sure you guys could as well. It's every transaction is different. Every seller, owner, buyer is different. Trying to align, personalities is almost impossible on every deal, and sophistication always adds a little extra layer in there as well. I don't even know if I have one story that sticks out. There's so many. We've had one deal. The guy was trying to be careful when I say. He didn't have any financials in check. It was, in the best location here in Florida. Didn't have any financials, lived in the park, didn't have any VIN numbers in the park on homes. That deal just got dragged out. Would call him, leave me voicemails and cuss me out, but realized that he called the wrong number. He wasn't trying to call me. He meant to call his ex-wife. And it was one of those deals that, he wanted me to come out on a Saturday and get the VIN numbers, get under the homes and try to find the VIN numbers. So that
was that Frank that called you?
Frank's deal was smooth.
Was that him that called you and yelled?
Frank's deal was one of the smoothest we had, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's so many, but it's just the personalities it makes it fun. It makes it fun. I wish I had a story. There's just every deal honestly has a story, but
did you go under the homes to get the VIN number?
No.
I just wanted to know because we probably have a couple of homes that if you do that, I'd like to know.
Yeah, they want us to pay the buyer's attorney fee, but we never talked to the attorney one. It's all kinds of wacky stuff, but it makes it fun. I love it.
Okay. Thank you, Hunter. And if anybody needed to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in touch, contact you or you and your team?
Yeah, you can just find us on Berkadia.com, Perkadia.com. My email is my first period last name at Berkadia. And yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on today.
Appreciate you being there.
Thank you very much, Hunter. And I just want to remind everyone, if anyone has a deal or questions about some of the topics that we discussed today, you can find us on the MHPExchange.com. And really appreciate you being here, Hunter.
Thank you guys.
And I appreciate you putting up with this man. I appreciate that.
Saves him a lot of time and keeps him with a full head of hair. So
you can join the club. It's like right now it's just me and his wife in the club of people that put up with Frank. We're gonna bring you into the club.
I talk on the daily.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you very much, Hunter. Appreciate you being on. Look forward to talking to you again soon, probably tomorrow. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye. If you have any questions, you could reach us at the MHP Exchange. Send in your comments, like us on YouTube, and share us on Instagram. Talk with you soon. Until next time, this is Frank Rizzo from the MHP Exchange.